Well, now back to politics, and while the Treasurer plans bank reforms, there are concerns the high Australian dollar could hit the federal budget bottom line. The opposition is calling for next week's financial outlook to be turned into a mini-budget. To discuss that and other political matters, I'm joined by our regular Friday Polly's panel. In the studio, Labor's Stephen Jones, and in Melbourne, Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg. Well, welcome to both of you.
Good afternoon, Ali. Good afternoon, Josh.
Good afternoon, Ali. Hi, Stephen.
Well, it's been a week, I want to say, dominated by aeroplane problems, but probably more relevant to you, the economy. Now it seems that the higher dollar is going to punch a hole in tax revenue. And Josh Frydenberg, if the budget does fall short, it's not going to be the government's fault, is it?
That's not true. This government has been spending recklessly, borrowing $100 million a day to fulfil its promises, and that's just not good enough, and it needs to cut its spending. And Andrew Robb and Joe Hockey have made that clear. But Ali, this government is in freefall. It has a treasurer who's a toothless tiger. It has a caucus that is craven and callow, according to one of its
But Josh, we're talking about the Australian dollar, and surely the government doesn't dictate the value of the dollar, and if it's the dollar that has hit our export earnings and revenues and therefore tax revenues, is that the fault of the government?
But it's a combination of things. That's the reason why we're not getting into surplus. And the reason is because this government has been spending too much money, borrowing too much money. And that's what we've been on about before the election with our promises, and now that's what we're on about now. But it just seems that it's got no idea about, fiscal responsibility.
Stephen Jones, that forecast surplus for 2013, it's pretty precious, isn't it?
It is, and we're determined to ensure that we deliver a surplus by 2013, 3 years ahead of time, 3 years ahead of any comparable country. Let's make a few points. Why is the Australian dollar so strong? Because our economy is recovering faster than any other country that we trade with, and because our finances are in tip-top shape, a point made a week ago by the IMF. And if I'm going to take economic advice, I'd rather take it from the IMF than Joe Hockey or Andrew Robb, who are just squabbling around like a pair of circus clowns trying to be the preeminent economic spokesperson from the Liberal Party. The fact is, our economy is in great shape, therefore the dollar is strong. We are committed to ensuring that we deliver a surplus by 2013, and I'm confident that we will do that.
At the same time, the indication is from the government that perhaps next week there will be some spending cuts announced, some of the tough medicine that you have to take. Is that right? Will it just be a mid-year economic review as is scheduled, or are we likely to see a lot more as the coalition's calling for?
Every 6 months, the last Treasurer, gives it the mid-year economic and financial outlook. Wayne Swan will deliver that on Tuesday. At the same time, he will give a pretty frank assessment of where our finances are going. About the spending, let's talk about what Labor has done and will continue to do. Our stimulus spending, targeted and tapered to ensure that we are injecting money in those parts of the economy that need it, like the building and construction sector, but withdrawing the stimulus from other areas such as retail where it's no longer needed. And the 2% lid on new government spending. So a commitment that's been given by Labor, unmatched by the other side.
Josh Frydenberg?
Ali, can I just say, one of the reasons why our dollar is increasing is because of the higher interest rates we have in Australia compared to other comparable jurisdictions. And one of the reasons why our interest rates go up is because the government keeps spending money. And so the Reserve Bank is putting its foot on the brake while Julia Gillard continues.
It does. It absolutely know a fair bit about this, and it's got absolutely nothing to do.
Faint phrase.
Got nothing to do with the government spending.
No, it doesn't.
As the IMF has said, it's the government spending that has made Australia the only economy in the OECD with unemployment of below 10%.
Ali, can I just say that interest rates attract investment overseas in terms of our dollar. That's what lifts it up. And we've had our 7th increase in interest rates in just over a year. And we've got struggling businesses, small businesses and households with mortgages who are struggling. And last week you had Wayne Swan who said, oh, look, Joe Hockey's got it completely wrong here. He's attacking the pillars of prosperity. That is the banks. He's attacking the pillars of prosperity. Now, when he's seen the Commonwealth Bank go for their grab above the Reserve Bank's interest rate rise, he's picked up the phone to the banks. Well, it's doing nothing, and that's why Wayne Swan is a toothless tiger.
Let's look at that issue of interest rates, because, I mean, the timing was fairly extraordinary, wasn't it? Within the hour of the Reserve Bank announcing an interest rate increase, the Commonwealth Bank announced one, and in fact almost double what the Reserve Bank announced. I mean, if there was any way of rubbing the government's nose in the fact that you have no control, wasn't that it?
Absolutely deplorable act, and yes, the government does not control interest rates. We stopped doing that in the mid-1980s, a position which, until a fortnight ago, was bipartisan in this country.
But if that's the case, why do we get, as Joe Hockey constantly reminds us, what is it, I think we're up to 37 times that Wayne Swan has now warned the banks, because clearly it would appear they're not listening.
Yes, and it's exactly why we have been working
You have picked up the phone to the banks. Picked up the phone to the banks.
It's why we are working studiously on a package of reforms which will introduce more competition into the banking sector. And that's a policy that I understand to be bipartisan as well. But here's one thing, here's one way you won't get more competition in the banking sector, and that is attempting to gazump a policy move, and that is by running around with thought bubble policies and attempting to rush a bill through Parliament to get a headline before Christmas. That's not going to deliver one iota more competition, and I think the independent member for New England has belled the cat when he said that this week.
Josh Frydenberg?
Well, no, absolutely wrong. Joe Hockey has put forward a considered 9-point plan, made a significant speech, and he's looking at a range of measures, including an inquiry into the financial system and looking at the risks that banks take and looking at their net interest margins, looking at their return on capital. All those sort of things are relevant to this debate, to look at the profitability of the banks in what is, a shrinking sector, and that's our point.
But Josh
we support greater competition.
Isn't it a fraught area? Because there really is only so much a government can do. I mean, as Joe Hockey says himself repeatedly, he is not suggesting that he goes in and re-regulates interest rates. So there's only so much pressure the government can bring to bear.
Well, starting with price signalling and giving the ACCC greater power in this regard. And, the other side, Ali, mocked us in Parliament, mocked us. And as I said, Wayne Swan attacked Joe Hockey for attacking the pillars of prosperity, i.e. the banks. Don't put words. That's what his words were.
For coming out.
No, he didn't.
Listen, here's the point, Josh and Ali.
It's always the point.
Here is the point. The point is that if financial market reform could be delivered through a PowerPoint presentation and a wonderful speech, presumably the other side would have done it for their 12 years in government.
But let me ask
They didn't, because it is not that easy.
We have a 9-point plan from Joe Hockey. We have a promise from the Treasurer that he will introduce his own reforms in coming weeks. How many of his reforms will come from that 9-point plan?
Absolutely none of them, Ali. We have been working
price signalling,
for months now.
Price signalling.
Not even price signalling, as Josh said, that is one of the reforms on the 9-point plan.
We have been working for months now, and somehow one of the stories got leaked into one of the major newspapers, and Joe Hockey, as he so often does, gets his policy from the ideas from the front page of a newspaper and has run with it in a cheap attempt to gazump the government. It is so transparent and see-through.
Josh Frydenberg, I want to move
on.
on.
No more substance than that.
But a quick final word on this issue.
Look, this is just one of the many issues that the government is fighting a fire on its flanks. It's got problems with its minority government, with the Greens. It's got problem with detention centres. It's got problem with the NBN. It's got problems on the water policy, and now it's got problems with the economy. It just gets from bad to worse for this government.
Because we're going to run out of time, let's jump on that other issue, which is the other significant issue in the political sphere this week, and that is the problem of detention and where to house asylum seekers. We saw overnight residents at Northam very upset in Western Australia. We saw earlier in the week similar meetings and similar concerns in South Australia. Josh Frydenberg, in South Australia, Tony Abbott visited there, and I wonder, was he helping or was he stirring the pot?
He's absolutely helping and listening, and the local member, Jamie Briggs, is doing a fantastic job trying to respond to the concerns and fears of his local community, because this is the point. Julia Gillard was in the area the days before she announced Inverbrackie as a detention centre, and it's, as we know, it's in a high fire area, it's an underused military base, and the reason why the government is going towards these desperate measures is because it hasn't stopped the boats. And Julia Gillard's just been overseas trying to drum up support for her East Timor offshore processing proposal, which doesn't which just doesn't work and is not getting support. What she should do, Ali and Stephen, is pick up the phone to the President of Nauru, where Australian tax dollars have been spent, and use that offshore processing centre.
Stephen Jones, the government does seem to have a problem here, certainly from local residents. There's not a lot of, or there's a lot of concerns, I should say, in both those places. For one, should Chris Bowen have gone to Northam? Should he have been present at that meeting yesterday?
Look, always more that can be done when you look at a situation in hindsight. But there's two approaches that have gone on over the last fortnight to this situation. One that we've seen in South Australia and another one in Western Australia. In Western Australia, we saw the Labor Party Minister Chris Bowen sitting down with a National Party state MP and a coalition federal MP, talking through the issues and dealing with the community's concern in a cooperative way. Almost complete opposite to the way that the reckless behaviour of Jamie Briggs in South Australia, trying to whip up community concern and not deal with it responsibly.
He's the representative.
Deal with it in exactly the same way, Ali, as Judy Moylan and Chris Bowen and the National Party members in Western Australia dealing with it with their proposals.
Josh Frydenberg?
This is just absolute rub. This is just passing the buck and not dealing with the source of the problem, which is they've got unauthorised arrivals coming by the boatload. You've got Christmas Island, which was built for 800 people, Ali. Currently, it's housing over 2,700. You've got Northern, you've got Inverbrackie, you've got other places around the country. This government is very desperate, but it just doesn't do what it should do and pick up the phone to Nauru.
Josh, we've got 42 million people worldwide who are displaced people, which is why we understand that if we're going to have a long-term solution and a sustainable solution, you need regional cooperation. And we were delighted,
why did you say
delighted for that reason that when the Prime Minister was overseas at the Southeast Asian Leaders Summit, that we had a communique on that very issue.
Didn't get support.
Stephen Jones' turn to get the last word this time, Josh Frydenberg, so I'm just going to let him do that. Thank you so much to both of you. We're out of time. Josh Frydenberg in Melbourne and Stephen Jones in Sydney. Many thanks for joining us once again. Look forward to seeing you next Friday.
Thank you.